So I got a text from a friend of mine a couple weeks ago asking what I thought would be a good idea to have for a first ever gig. And I realized I didn't do my research. So this is what I've learned. So when we're talking about doing your first ever gig, there's a couple things that we need to establish right off the bat. One, we would assume that you have a guitar that's functional for a kind of gig where you're plugging into a sound system. If you don't, I'll leave a bunch of recommendations for pretty affordable guitars down in the description below. But with that out of the way, assuming you already have that, we're looking at a couple major categories. We're looking at microphones, we're looking at cables, and we're looking at accessories. Now, shopping for your first microphone can be a little intimidating because there's so many to choose from. You don't know what kind of mic fits best where because there's a bunch of different options and pickup patterns and dynamic versus condenser. We're not going to focus on that right now. We're going to focus on a microphone that'll be perfect and get you through every type of gig that you find yourself doing, especially if it's your first ever one. And there's a couple different options that we land on. The first one, I'm sure you've seen it in any concert venue or any bar. It's called the Shure SM58. The second one is from SE Electronics, the V7, and the third one is from Sennheiser, and it is the E835. Now, each of those microphones are going to run you somewhere between $90 to $100, but those microphones, especially using the Shure SM58, they are bulletproof. And essentially, you can take them to any venue, any gig, any stage, and you're gonna get by just fine, especially for the price point. You see videos and memes of dented microphones and people dragging it all over the place. Those things are practically indestructible, and you'll be able to get your money's worth and be able to sing well and have clarity in your vocal. And I actually use the SE V7 when I do shows, full band shows in particular. Now, cables can get a little funky. Now, there's two types of cables that we're going to look at. There's microphone cables, which we call XLRs, and there are guitar cables, which we call quarter-inch cables. There's different kinds of quarter-inch cables, but for now, we're just going to call them broadly quarter-inch cables. Now, for a beginner entry level, you don't want to spend too much money, I'm sure. You want to be able to have something that's usable and feasible for the budget. So the two main brands that I would suggest are Gator and Proco. You can look them up on sweetwater.com or Amazon for somewhere between the $15 to $30 mark. And those cables will get by just fine with plugging into a DI box, plugging in directly to a soundboard, and you shouldn't need anything longer than 25 feet. I personally use 10-foot cables because I don't really need the cables to go that far. If you are trying to plug it into a soundboard that's off on the side of the stage, I would suggest a 25-foot cable. But if you're just plugging it into a little box that's on the ground in front of you, a 10-foot cable will be just fine. Now, a couple accessory things to talk about that a lot of people don't think about. The first thing is a guitar tuner, and a good guitar tuner. Not a lot of guitar tuners, in my opinion, are nice and cooperative. The best one that I've found that's budget friendly is the Snark clip-on tuners. They're a little clunky on the headstock, in my opinion, versus other ones from Diodario and other comparable brands. But in terms of price point and in terms of pitch accuracy, that's gonna be the best bang for your buck. And the last part of it is actually a microphone stand. You run into a lot of venues, especially me being from Hawaii, microphone stands aren't around. A lot of times you'll see musicians show up to the venue and show up to the gig without a mic stand because they assumed that the venue would have one, and even if the venue has one, it's falling apart, it's not being taken care of. The little crank for the boom arm is non-existent, and you have to maneuver it in a way that you're just breaking the stand the more that you kind of force it to behave. So I would always suggest musicians to bring their own microphone stand. And if you get something from On Stage, that's gonna run probably about $35 or $40 on average. Those stands are super lightweight, they're super durable, and they're gonna get by in no matter what kind of gig you're doing. If you're standing, if you're sitting, you'll be able to use all of that stuff. Now, for those of us in the room that maybe want a little more of an intermediate type of equipment, have a little more money or budget to spend for microphones and whatnot, let me recommend some things for you. So for those in the intermediate level, I would always recommend Shure and Sennheiser for those. The Beta 58A is an incredible mic, as well as the Sennheiser E935. Both of those are somewhere between the 130 to 150 mark. And those are still great dynamic microphones. You don't need phantom power. We'll talk about that in a later video. But you don't need any of the fancy things to make it work, and it still gets you the quality that you need. Personally, I've always been a Shure guy just because that's the mic I started on. And for my voice, I prefer the extra bump in clarity that a Shure mic gives over a Sennheiser mic. Guitar cables, microphone cables, I always use Mogami brand cables. Now, the thing with Mogami cables is that, yes, they're expensive. They're going to run you between $75 to $150, depending on how long the cable is, maybe $200+. But the reason why I invest in those cables is that Mogami has a lifetime warranty policy. Now, asterisk, by taking it back to the place that you bought it from. So if I have a cable that's damaged, or if it breaks, or if I run over it, or if I pinch it from the stool that I'm sitting on, I can always go back to the place that I bought it or make a claim online with whatever online retailer you bought it from, and they'll be able to replace it, no problem. So if you're willing to take the extra steps in doing that warranty policy, I would definitely recommend the Mogami cables. I use a 10-foot Mogami cable for my shows, and a 25-foot Mogami cable when I'm playing electric guitar or the stage is a little bit bigger and I have more freedom to move around. Now for microphone stands, I still wouldn't recommend anything more expensive or more outside of the budget than the on-stage stands from part one of the video, only because when you start getting into bigger, thicker stands, you're usually looking at them in a recording studio setting when they're big, clunky mics that need the extra support from a heavy stand. If you're just putting a SM58 or a Beta 58A or a Sennheiser microphone on it, anything around that realm from onstage, K&M, anything comparable like that, you're gonna be just fine. Personally, for me, when I'm using equipment, I started on a Beta 58. The first ever gig I did, I ran to the music store and I just bought it because it was the only thing I could afford at the time, being 19 years old. And it lasted me years. I dropped it and there were dents in the grill, and I kept using it because it was still good until I was gifted my first condenser microphone. Now, condenser microphones are a little more tricky to use. They don't play as nicely in especially loud settings, a lot of full band type of concert venue type of situations. They don't really play as nice. So I wouldn't recommend using any kind of condenser microphones at those kinds of venues. But I was gifted my first condenser microphone, and I still use condenser microphones when I'm playing solo or duo acoustic shows. Now, the type of microphone I use is the Neumann KMS 105. It runs, if I'm not mistaken, at time of recording, around the $700 mark. Now, that's a mic that I worked up to with gigging and producing music and touring, so I had a little extra money to spend on a quality microphone. I'd never use that in a full band setting. The actual kind of microphone I use is an SE-V7, and it's sitting right behind the camera over there. And it's been fantastic. I actually have two of them. I have a silver chrome model and the standard black and red model. And I use them in every full band show. One, because it's clear and it is crisp enough for my voice. And also personally, I just like a flat grill. I'm not a huge fan of a circular dome grill. I started using those microphones merely for an aesthetic purpose, and then found out that they were great in all the types of different settings that I use them in. Now, cables, I've been spoiled by having custom Mogami cables made for me. They're super thin and very lightweight and very compact. I'll show them off in a rig rundown video for my loop station that's coming up in a little bit. But I use those custom Mogami cables. I use Mogami 1/4 inches. I started playing Mogami or with Mogami cables about 7 or so years ago, and they've been great, and I have not needed to buy a new one to replace an old one. I've bought new ones to add to the different types of gear bags. I don't usually mix up my gear bags. I have one for solo gigs, I have one for band gigs, I have one for playing bass, and I have one for playing guitar. So I have cables, enough cables, thankfully, over the last few years of acquiring little by little. Now with all of that, whether it's your first gig you're getting ready for, your 10th gig, your 100th gig, your 1000th gig, start small, build up, and acquire little by little, because music can be a very expensive industry and a very expensive profession. And a lot of people get turned away by the fact that they're running up their tab of essentials for a few $100s. But I promise you, you'll get your money's worth. 1, if you take care of your things, and 2, if you know how to use them and use them well. And if you are watching this video because you're looking for equipment for your first gig, I wish you well. You're gonna kill it. And hopefully what I learned helps in some way.